Okay, so I think I'm going to begin by, I'll share our screen with a little bit about the turning point. We are a rape crisis center. We're based here. We are based in Plano. We serve survivors of sexual violence. And I'm here today with Kristen Flo. She's our clinical manager. And happy Valentine's Day. We're going to be talking about loving yourself and self-care. But before we get started on that, I just wanted to mention that our mission here is to provide counseling, education, and advocacy for those impacted by sexual violence. We have a crisis line that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's 1-800-866-7273. And with that, we will start our conversation. So happy Valentine's Day, Kristen. Uh-oh, we got some problems with it.
Happy Valentine's Day. Glad to be here. Glad to be here talking about love and self-love, most of all.
Yes. So I thought this was a perfect tie-in for Valentine's Day with all love in the air, but I have a feeling that when we talk about self-love, maybe it's going to be a little different than the messages we receive from bubble baths and chocolate. So I don't know. Can you go ahead and tell me what you mean when we talk about self-love or self-care?
Yeah, certainly. I'd love to talk about it. I think there's a lot more to know than is, the bubble baths and chocolate kind of ideas. So what is self-love? So there's, we talk about a few different domains in self-love, which is self-awareness. So we know to know ourselves, self-worth, the ability to kind of make mistakes and still hold on to the idea that I am a worthy and capable human, worthy of happiness and fulfillment and safety. Self-esteem is another facet of that. So how I think and feel and behave and how all of that impacts the way that I see myself. And then we have self-care, which is the action-oriented facet of self-love. And we'll be talking about that mostly today. But all of these things are very important to just the overall concept of self-love because these self-awareness, self-worth, self-esteem, self-care, these are all impacted heavily by our upbringing, by the people around us, by our culture, everything that we understand about, who is worthy of loving oneself, and then how do we do that? So that is kind of where we're at today, and we're going to go into a bit of maybe why that's difficult for some people.
Yeah, so I'm curious. So we hear about self-love and we hear about self-care. It is everywhere these days. But I have a feeling that the messages that we receive maybe don't align with what's actually going on. And so from your counseling background, from your clinical perspective, I would like to hear maybe why either the message isn't getting through or maybe we're going about it the wrong way and why it's so difficult to love ourselves.
Yes. Well, I think one thing that I just want to point out is there is a very big pressure in our culture to essentially thrive in any type of environment. And so we're put into a situation surrounded by not great people or practices, and we are expected to do really well in those instances. And so a lot of times there isn't an emphasis on taking care of oneself and choosing good people around you and maintaining emotional boundaries, things like that. Those things, a lot of people don't even hear the word boundaries or emotional boundaries. So just knowledge itself is not shared as much as it needs to be. And that's another reason why we're here, is because we want to really clear up what is self-love and what is self-care. How can we advocate for ourselves in a world that does have a lot of trouble and pain and obstacles for us? So one of the things that really matters is the way in which we develop a schema for self-love and self-care. It can be very difficult because, you know, in our culture, in a Eurocentric lens, you know, again, we think about who is deserving of love. How do we show that love? What does history say about who deserves love? And then as well as our caregivers who influence that the people around us, if they are nurturing and they are protective and they are wise and they respond to us when we are in need, then we learn and internalize that idea of what healthy love is, what healthy attachment is. And so if we do not have that growing up, then we don't really know what to look for or how that feels in our body even. So learning about self-love, learning about how we can surround ourselves with healthy relationships and practices to take care of ourselves is very, very crucial at this time. It always has been, but we really need to have a whole paradigm shift so that we can all understand how to survive and thrive, you know, moving forward.
Yeah, so one of the things I heard a presentation that you did a few days ago at one of our trainings, and it was talking about maybe the different domains of self-care. And I found this to be fascinating because I love anything that you can kind of outline and put in a box and see a framework. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what that means and how it relates to loving ourselves and caring for ourselves.
Sure. Yes. Yes, there are very different domains of self-care. And so these are all extremely important to pay attention to really care for ourselves as a whole being. The first step, you know, in looking at these domains is to honor the fact that we are complex humans and we do have needs. We have real pain inside of us and real struggles. And so in doing this self-care to help ourselves, we're also validating the pain that we've been through and our need to take care of ourselves. So these are the different domains we have here. So social, I was just talking about how it's important to surround ourselves with people who are helpful and supportive. And so in the therapy trauma realm, that can be the safety of a ventral vagal nervous system where we are able to safely connect with somebody else. You know, I saw something that said we are a balance of the 5 nervous systems we surround ourselves with most. And so if we are around people who are constantly on edge or critical or against us, then we won't be able to thrive. And so being able to seek out those positive, helpful relationships, you know, and what we all want in social connection is to be seen and to be fully known. And so like for us in having these conversations, that in order to be fully known and exist as ourselves in society, we have to have conversations about the hard stuff because those core parts of us are sometimes really burdened by trauma in the past. And in order to really have fulfilling relationships, we need to acknowledge all of that, as well as our strengths and perseverance and hopes and all of that.
Well, how important it is then that we're in safe relationships. So to be vulnerable, I think that makes it critical that those people that we surround ourselves with offer that sort of safe space to begin to reveal those parts of us.
Yes, definitely. And that's a big value of mine, ours, and I know our whole mission here is to provide that space for connection. Just a little bit about the rest of the domains, the physical domains, so just our basic human needs, you know, eating well, exercise, making sure we have enough water, understanding, also gaining knowledge about nutrition and exercise and why those things are beneficial to the human body. That can be really convincing on why I should do this physical self-care. There's certain trauma is stored in the hips. And so there are things about hip stretches and psoas releases that can really help with processing trauma. You can find safety spots in your body that can be really good at anchoring in a distressing moment. We have another physical needs of self-care is embodying different postures, embodying different ideas, and letting that live in your body and feel grounded. The other ones we have are a little bit more, I think, complex, but we have the emotional domain. And so that, it's important to identify the triggers and the negative emotions in us. How do we cope with distress and overwhelming emotions? A lot of us don't ever learn that from our caregivers or culture or wherever. So then we also have something for psychological. So there's a lot that goes into psychological, but here gaining knowledge, self-awareness is a big facet of this. Reflecting on your internal behavior, the meanings of those. These are all very important. Again, learning boundaries, researching, identifying needs. So those things like physical, all of that, but also like security, safety, loyalty, those kind of things. So that we can start making decisions that really match us and align and feel right to me. So the last one that I'm at is spiritual self-care. And so just wanted to highlight, we have a book club going on right now in our groups, and that we use Bell Hook's definition of love. And it is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And so then we get to the idea of what is spirituality, and that's a really important point that we must explore here. And whatever your idea of spirituality might be, the key element is becoming aware of what helps us feel connected to the wider world around us. So even listening, meditating, silence, qigong, dance, yoga, walking in nature, all of these things, they don't have to be religious. They don't, but oftentimes they are, but there are so many spiritual practices that are already in indigenous cultures, and that lots of people are actively trying to integrate back into our culture. So those are all very important.
So I saw the image that you sent about the tree of contemplative practices. So I went ahead and threw that into the chat, but I thought that was just a great picture of the very different ways that we can go about and exploring that aspect and caring for that aspect of ourselves.
Yeah.
So I threw that one in the chat, but I wonder if you could kind of, how do we go about figuring out maybe what the best approach for self-care for ourselves is. I know I've heard, and this is my love language right here, talking about a self-care plan, because I love plans of all types. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and I'll continue to throw some resources up in the chat. But the self-care planning and being able to kind of create this supportive environment for oneself.
Yes, I would love to. So, first and foremost, I think there's a few different steps, and a lot of times it's identifying our needs and finding barriers and all of that. So really we want to do a reflective practice. How am I coping with stress now? What are the ways in which I react in certain moments, or what patterns do I see? Are there changes necessary to how I am coping with stress? We also want to identify the ones that actually we already practice that are helpful to us. And so it can be really important to validate those things and even gain knowledge and understand more about why they have been so helpful to you. I think continuing to acknowledge that all of these things have psychosocial neurobiological effects on us that can be very, very, very positive and beneficial for our well-being. To constantly remind ourselves of that helps us to build habits. And really that's what we're doing, is we're trying to wire our brain in a way that our self-care habits are now integrated with our survival, where, you know, our habit center and our survival center are right there next to each other. So all of our habits, our brain thinks are necessary for survival. So if we build these, then we can integrate them into our lives the more that we practice them. And then
Oh, I was just going to say, that's fascinating, the way that our physical bodies, that the way that these habits actually affect our physical bodies. That is so interesting.
it is. There's a lot to know, and I'm so excited for more and more people to understand all this this scope. So really the next is just identifying barriers as they come up, and then really consciously and mindfully implementing this plan. And so knowing it is very important. It might be boring at times. It's not gratifying. It's not a screen or, you know, a sugary substance, but it is one of the most fulfilling things that we can do for ourselves.
Great. So we're about to wrap up here, but I just wondered if you had any additional, maybe action steps that anybody listening who could try, or maybe some of those first steps. I threw a lot of the resources up into the chat. So hopefully as people come across this video, or those that are listening live, we'll take a moment to go through them, to begin to think about their practices and self-care plans. But do you have any other sort of action items that you would recommend people take?
Yes. Well, some of those links that you dropped in the chat, I know maybe have some self-care assessments. And so I would just really start there into getting to know yourself, getting to know which nervous system state you're in a lot of the time. Are you in, maybe you're in fight or flight a lot of the time, very active and on edge, or maybe you're feeling shut down a lot of the time. So in that more collapsed nervous system state. And so really getting to know yourself and what triggers you, I think is the first step, and meeting that with, you know, more and more self-compassion, because that's how we're going. We can't criticize ourselves for that, but we can find things that will help us build that. So there's another resource I know called stayingsafe.net. Has some really good examples of things that we can do to get through just the moment, to get through the next hour, and then all the way up to really that emergency safety plan that we might need. So those things are just really good at exploring possibilities and ways that we can do self-care.
Wonderful. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for joining on here today to talk with us about self-care and those first steps. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the Valentine's Day, and I'll be here next week with Angela, our communications manager, and I'm so excited. We're going to have a conversation about Rosa Parks and the connection between Rosa Parks and sexual violence advocacy. So I hope you'll join us next week as we continue to talk about issues that are related to our mission here. Thanks, Kristen. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Amy.